package, a perfect case, or STL or any graphics library or something like that. Being able to get like an isolated environment for that means that you are able to run it on any machine. You're right that there are some of these manual steps, right? That you always have to, you have to install OpenSSL and this way, and this way, and that. And with Pixi, we try to alleviate this. And I even had to get used to it, that I would see an issue and I'm like, I probably can't reproduce it because I'm like used to not being able to reproduce these things. But then there was a Pixi file and I thought, no, I can just run it and start, which is like kind of like great. And once you get used to it, you don't want to go back. And I think that is something we would like to change. Like so many computer science programs where people have like one whole day of setting up their PCs and someone is using a Mac while the other ones are using Windows, and we just want to get rid of that friction.
Hello and welcome to the Pybites podcast, where we talk about Python, career and mindset. We're your hosts. I'm Julian Sequeira.
And I am Bob Beldebos. If you're looking to improve your Python, your career, and learn the mindset for success, this is the podcast for you. Let's get started.
All right. So, hey, Ruben and Tim, nice to have you here on our podcast.
Yes, thank you, Owen, for having us.
So, it has been a while since we last spoke with Wolf. It was in November 23, actually, about Pixi. And back then, I was already, in terms of the idea, convinced that Pixi has a bright future. And now we have been a couple of months in, actually. It's like August 24 right now. So it's not so long time, but there's been a lot of changes happening. And that's why we wanted to have you on the podcast again. And we're really happy when you accepted also the invite. And now, we would be looking forward to talk a little bit more about what are the new features and also who is behind Pixi. So what is the team of Pixi looking like? Therefore, I'm happy to have you two on the podcast. And maybe you can just quickly introduce yourselves with a couple of words, and then we move on to the topics and questions we have prepared.
Yes, thank you. I can go first. My name is Ruben. I work at Prefix since a little more over a year now. And previously, I've always been in robotics. And that also spawned the requirement for having good installations of your computer, because that was pretty hard. And that spawned me into the package management area, which later became my new job at Prefix, where I mostly maintain Pixi right now. So that's also why I'm here.
Nice.
Hi, so I'm Tim. I studied computer science at the university, and I was first really into gaming. So I worked at a gaming startup. But my graduation was similar to Ruben's in robotics. So we ended up in the same company. Like Ruben said, like installation in robotics is notoriously difficult. And I was like, when I was working in games, I really liked building tools for other game developers or artists, and that's what I did a lot. And we worked on our own game engine at the time. I got really interested into packaging, which sounds weird maybe, but it scratches some of the same itch that the tool development had. And so I was glad to move to Prefix, which was then founded. And I'm having a blast since, and it's been really good. And also contributing to open source more. So that's been great.
Nice. Do you have some latest wins to share with the audience? I can maybe get going in the beginning. So now working a couple of months in a new startup, and we recently had like a first live interaction, let's say, with the system. And that was really exciting. So basically, I think it's always nice when the software is not just software, but also having some real world application or effect, basically.
Yeah, I think for me, and I hope for Ruben personally, is like just the other day we were GitHub trending with Pixi for Rust projects at least. So we're like in the 4th place, which like I couldn't have really imagined anything I made ever being there. So that was pretty cool, I have to say. I immediately sent it to like people that that we work with, like marketing people in the US and stuff, and then and they were pretty excited. So it was a win, a definite win.
Nice.
I would fully agree with that one. I have one more to add to it. That's that I have been to PyPI in July, and I've met a lot of people there, which was awesome. And then I obviously told all of them about Pixi, and now I'm still getting messages from people that tried it out and also agree with me that it was pretty cool to use, and they're going forward with it. So that's a huge win for myself to see those people get onto Pixi.
Awesome, yeah. And maybe we can talk later a little bit about your journey in open source and basically creating something that then people actually use, because that's something that our podcast listeners also care about quite a bit, like how to get started on the one side with programming in general. And then maybe when they create some packages, how to maybe set it up so that people actually use it, right? And how to talk to people and what to build and all these kind of questions in general. Yeah, basically, maybe a couple of things first to just get started, why it's interesting to already have another podcast after only like 8 months now or 9 months. There have been quite some improvements in Pixi. I noted a couple of them. Maybe you have some more to add. But for me, something that was really exciting was on the one side, the Visual Studio Code integration. So until now, you had to kind of manually set the path and so on. And now just recently, a couple of weeks ago, it's basically automatically detected and works really well, I would say. So yeah, I think that's also just another step towards showing that it's really mature if VS Code integrates it and you can use it seamlessly. So maybe do you have something to add there, like a background story also? How easy was it to integrate? I just followed it loosely and saw that there was quite some changes on the VS Code side where you would have thought that maybe it's very simple change to just add that, but was quite a big PR. Yeah, so maybe if you have something to add on that from your side, would be interesting.
Yeah, I could definitely extend it a little more. To be fair, the big PR was written mostly by our colleague Bas, and he did an awesome job on the TypeScript that is needed to make an extension or edit an extension. This particular extension that we added to was the Python extension from Microsoft. And to get into that, you need to just make a PR on their open source version of that project. What was definitely good for us is that it was already done for other package managers. So it was already done for, of course, pip, poetry, and conda itself. So it was basically kind of redoing it again for the Pixi package manager. So you need to tell the extension how to find Pixi, and if it found it, how to interact with the API of Pixi, and then from that get some information that is then automatically set up in the extension itself. So in the theory, it's not super hard. It's just a lot of places where this touches the extension. So that all had to be modified to also accept Pixi information.
Nice. And another one that I noted was also the pyproject.toml support. So in November, it was basically like there's the Pixi TOML config. And that was the only place where you could set it up. So then the question was coming like, how quickly can you integrate it with pyproject.toml file? And I think it was really fast. I don't know when it happened, but I don't remember anymore, but it happened soon-ish afterwards, I would say.
Yeah, so that's actually a great one to talk about because it also gets into the open source bit of Pixi a bit more. Because that mostly that work was done by Oliver Lacroix, who works for a company and is based himself in Australia. And so he was willing to pick that up, and he made like this nice abstraction where you kind of choose between the two manifest versions, but you could reuse kind of like the same data types. And there had to be some decisions made, like we have to interpret this a bit differently, or that a bit differently, or we have to add this by default. But it was so great that he was like super quick and he's such a friendly guy and like awesome to work with. Like if I send him something to test, he tests it, and like he does that work like he works, and I think he runs in Australia, and then he does the work in the off hours at night, right? So sometimes he just like does this big push of a lot of work, and sometimes he's traveling, and then he gets to it a bit less. But it's just like so awesome to be able to have these people and contribute to it. So I think he did most of the work. So a lot of credit should go to him, and a lot of people have benefited since.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's definitely deserving a shout out. And as you say, Australia, that may be also something for Julian to host a podcast session with him maybe in person or so in Australia. I wouldn't mind do it either, but it's just a bit more traveling, let's say, than Australia.
Yeah. So that could be interesting, and that's been great. Like we've had more people contribute, and like have some regular people coming back, and it's just like what I try to do now is as a general thing is like when I see like some contributions, I contact these people personally. I try to contact them and see if they want to have a talk or even a call, so they can also explain their use case and why they're interested in Pixi. And the positive experience for me has been that most of them are like, totally, I want to call in an hour or something, right? Super cool. So I thought like maybe I'm imposing a bit, but I haven't found that until now. So
nice. So how does it generally work for you in Pixi? I mean, you now mentioned that many times open source developers do their normal job, whatever it is in science and industry or so, and then on the sidelines they also work on open source. How has that been for you? Like the journey towards open source, let's say, how does it look like right now? How much do you work, let's say, on Pixi topics, and how much do you work on open source topics that are maybe related or completely unrelated that are interesting for you? If you want to talk a bit about that in either order, Tim and Ruben.
You go first, Ruben.
Thanks. So for me, I started with it when we started to work on package management at the robotics company I mentioned before, where Tim also worked. There we did a project where we moved everything from super specific opt, pip, and some other tools meshed together into the whole conda ecosystem. And there we required to update some of the packages. So I think one of my first real contributions was getting packages onto conda-forge, which feels small, but is actually very helpful if you start with that, because you can very easily maintain it yourself while also helping a huge community at the same time. That moved me a little more into helping with these smaller projects around Conda and conda-forge. And actually, really quickly after that, I already started a prefix. So I haven't done a lot of open source in the company I was before, but it's kickstarted there, and I completely moved to the open source work after that. And currently at Prefix, I think 99% of my work is in the open. So it's now completely my full-time job. We of course have some of the contributors that don't have full-time job in open source, but then sometimes get time from their company, like, we really need this feature and this tool. And then they contact us like, hey, I want this feature. I could build it myself. Is it allowed to build in? And with a little call, we often find an agreement, and then they develop that part of the feature in their company's time, which is also always a great experience, because you don't have to do it in your free time, and you can actually open source in your paid hours, which is always best.
And that's of course something to maybe not so easy to ask, right? As an if you're an employer of your company and you're employee basically of the company, and you maybe have that idea, but it's also not so easy to communicate to the managers. There's maybe a whole topic for itself how to best do that, but yeah, it's nice that it is possible. And maybe when you as a podcast listener hear this, maybe you also see some ways of how you could do that yourself. Tim, how about you? How was your journey?
So I had some small open source projects that I did, but just for fun, more or less. And then sometimes I made a contribution here or there, but not really significant. And then, yeah, actually, Prefix is just my first time doing like big open source work. Like at a previous company, we had some things that I thought we could potentially open source, but as you were saying, for an employer, it's sometimes difficult to see like how that could benefit them. And I think that's like something we struggled with. So yeah, I think that it's like if you get the opportunity to do something with a company that does open source, it's like the easiest way to get into it, like as the fast path, so to speak. But on the other hand, there's also, of course, a lot of people that do it in their free time, like as I said before, or where it's directly beneficial to the company. But now that we have worked in open source a bit more, we do see quite a lot of companies, even big ones like Airbnb and Meta and things like this, that do get dedicated time to do open source, and I think it benefits them. So I think as a company you could take note of that, and if maybe as a listener you could look at one of those programs and see how they work and maybe try to implement that, and especially I think focus on things that are not in the critical path, like that are really needed but not really what you want to sell, and I think that's just good things to open source. But and since then most of my time has been in open source as well. It's just like almost all of our products are open source currently. So there's that.
Do you have some other things that that were added to the Pixi editor or prefix in general that you would underline as new features since November? I mean, maybe it's not so easy for you to think which were the diffs, let's say, since then, but if there's something, would be nice to add.
I did a quick search on what that could be, but I saw that when you talked with Wolf, we already had a pretty good idea of what we wanted. So a lot of the work was just improving on top of what we already believed in. Some things we would like to mention and are also coming from open source contributors doing the complete proposal is the multi-environment and solve group tooling, which means that you can define different environments in a project. You could see this as the optional dependencies for the pyproject.toml, for instance, where you say, oh, I also have a set of dependencies for the test. I also have a set of dependencies for my CI setup. And Pixi then can solve them as one and then create different environments where you need the specific dependencies, and it all gets locked into your log file. This also helps a lot with making sure that what you test is exactly the same as what you run on deployment or in CI or wherever you run your project, because we are able to solve the dependencies for the different environments at the same time, making sure that the solve works with the complete set, but you don't have to install everything all the time. A good example of this is when you lint, you would like to use the same linter as in your development environment, but the linting environment is just the linter and not all the dependencies of your project, which is always cool. We actually made a list for extra topics, but maybe this is also the right time to mention the PyPI integration, because I believe that wasn't done.
Totally, you're right. Yeah, click on.
With the last podcast, but I would like to ask Tim to explain more about that.
Yeah,
Sure.
so as I don't know what your listeners know, but you have like the PyPI ecosystem, which has like a collection of wheels. PyPI has gone a long way, right? It used to be like this simple source things, source Python distributions, and then set up Py, and then it went through a lot of iteration, and people often make a bit of fun of the Python packaging part, but they were also kind of like the first ones together with Perl and like these other package managers that had to figure all this stuff out. So you didn't have the benefit of hindsight. I think they've done a good job. So that's one ecosystem. So that's mainly wheels. And then you have conda, which are conda packages, and people associate that with Python a lot, but it's actually general packages. So it's more like, in that sense, more like Debians than wheels, in the sense that it can contain any kind of binary library or whatever. And the question since the beginning of conda is like, okay, this is not available as a conda package, but it is available as a PyPI wheel, let's say. I want to install it into the environment, which seems easy enough because they, like if you use a conda environment, like the right Python paths already set up, you will have like a side packages folder. You have something similar to a VM, so it should be able to, so you can install into it directly, but because of like mismatched dependencies, it can mess up your environment pretty quickly. So we always had the idea to like, okay, let's do this a little bit better. So initially, we had our own solver and reader from PyPI that could like take a set of locked conda packages and say, I want to install this PyPI package. Does it satisfy the dependencies in some way? Or if it's not, then yeah, I can't install. Which is a bit better than just trying to install it and see what happens, because there can be a lot of incompatibilities. For example, wheels often package their shared libraries next to their C libraries next to the Python libraries, and then if you use a conda thing, it might not expect that at that point, or might expect something different, and that you would get like a break at runtime, which is pretty annoying. So we kind of like made progress there by, like I said, looking at the conda packages first, using that as like the locked versions, then at least then the solver knows what was already installed, and then installing the PyPI package on top, like resolving and installing them on top. So we initially used our own project called RIP for it, and then UV came around the bend. Maybe we can talk about it a bit more later. And then we actually integrated with that because it was also a Rust project. And we have our own way of noting down these dependencies. And this also helped with the pyproject.toml because we could use the dependencies from the pyproject, interpret them directly as PyPI dependencies. So you could essentially use Pixi as a wheel-only installer, but you lose some of the benefits. But that made that integration a bit better.
Yeah. And I think that was a huge step because, like you said, sometimes packages are only available on conda. or if you would want to install them somehow with pip, you need to install some other dependencies on top. Other times you want to have the latest version, which is only available on PyPI for Python. So then you have to go with pip. And so, that was great that was the addition. And I also, like in the previous podcast episode, I already said that I like the combination of conda and pip because normally I would always use conda so that you can manage Python version, you can install pip, you can install conda packages, everything together. Whereas, for example, with poetry and so on, you only can install with pip, at least to my current understanding. I think they didn't edit this support yet. And so I like that Pixi also brings in everything from the two worlds, but also the usability of poetry. So, and I guess there were probably quite some like making PyPI available. Or was it just smooth? Like you just said, okay, using the pyproject.toml and then a couple of things needed to be added to make PyPI packages installable on Pixi.
Well, the funny thing is like some of like the general concepts are kind of similar between conda and PyPI, but some of them are very different, like the way you get like the index data and the way it's stored, and these are quite different. But when you get to the solve step, they're very similar. So when we were still using RIP, our previous project, that we could use the same solver as we did for conda, which was general enough to modify, which kind of gave us the idea like maybe every packaging ecosystem has this kind of like minimal thing that you could reduce it to, and then you could like essentially solve every package together somehow. That would be kind of cool. But that at least worked for conda and PyPI. But on the other hand, there were like loads of different concepts that conda doesn't have. For example, environment markers and wheel tags and things like that you have to take into account, and you have to like derive from your conda environment. And there's like, so the integration of the thing is very difficult. But if you go like to the low level conceptual solving part, it's other than that getting the metadata is different, like that is quite similar. And I think most of these packaging ecosystems can be reduced to this, looking at this in some capacity with different requirements, of course. So I think that was very interesting to learn also, and very interesting to find out that like what the differences were, and also my team was like super conda based, right? And then they were saying, PyPI this. And I was like, well, actually, I've learned this and I've learned that. And actually, I quite like that, how they made these decisions. Like maybe it's something we could also learn from again and bring back to conda. So that was also good. I think this cross-pollination is good.
Yeah, and I like how, for example, in Fast API, Sebastian Ramirez said, hey, how these are all the other frameworks that usually do something like backend development. And I got inspired by this framework because they did this nice, by the other framework because they did that nice. And I think that's also something, I think you already started that on the Pixi documentation, but maybe it could also be interesting, right, to add this, all the different things that Pixi basically combines from the different package managers and makes it therefore even nicer, like because it can build on top of giants, let's say, on the one side, and learn from new methodologies, let's say, that weren't available. Like you said, for the PyPI people who set up PyPI, they were the first ones to do it, and they didn't have the benefit of hindsight to learn from others.
Yeah, for sure. And that, I think you're making an interesting point, because we are on the one hand, and you were saying this very correctly, so I just want to repeat it, building on the shoulders of giants, which are conda and everything, conda-forge. But we also, when we started the company, we really liked the workflow of poetry. We really liked the workflow of cargo. And we thought like, why does conda not have something like this? And then that's how we kind of like looked at other things and thought like, hey, how can we use this? And even like some of our command line flags are directly inspired by cargo, for better or for worse, because they're also sometimes seem to be a bit unclear if you don't know anything about it. So that was pretty good. Sorry, I'm being...
No worries. So basically talking about how you brought up a Pixi prefix, or how it was founded. Maybe can you tell the story how you came together? Then I have a couple of company or enterprise related questions as well afterwards. But maybe just starting with that.
Yeah, sure, I can answer those, of course. The start of Prefix was together with Wolf, Bas, and Tim. Wolf being our CEO, boss, and Tim worked at the company I was also working at previously at the robotics company. And because we were working on package management there, we got in contact with Wolf, who was working on package management, but also specifically for robotics. So it was kind of a good group. Then Wolf said he was going to start a company in this space and asked us to join, and then also asked us to join. I didn't immediately start with the rest of the group, so they worked on Rattler and other projects the first half year, and after half year, I also thought, maybe that is the better option. Super fun to work in the open source, so I also joined the company, and that was basically the first year. And since then, we've slowly grown, trying out some freelancers, and now actually also hired two new colleagues within the company. So we're currently with 6 people that work on our products.
Nice. So that's also, I guess, if people are interested in packaging in general and so on, then they can just start with open source contributions. And how is the situation? You're looking forward to grow more and do more. I guess there's enough problems to solve, or how does that look like?
So one funny thing I think is good to mention, if you are interested in going into the open source world, we hired everyone. Everyone that was hired later was hired by first seeing them having a PR on our project and actually see what they did. And in that way, we got in contact and became more interesting, and the communications were nice. So that kickstarts your conversation about the job with an open source company. And I would definitely say going forward, that's always the best way to approach us or any other open source company. I did forget your question.
No, that answered it perfectly. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, if the listeners are interested in Pixi and maybe also even going to that job or any other company that is related to an open source project as well, that really it can pay off, or it can really make a difference to contribute open source, because then you may have doors that open up that previously would be hard to find, even, let's say. And similar story we heard also for Fast API, right? With the contributors from that contributed there. So yeah, it's good to hear that. And another related question is for the enterprise part, right? So you're also now an enterprise, let's say. I remember a meetup we had here in Berlin where someone was asking, hey, is Pixi already enterprise grade ready, let's say? Is it because it's somewhere in the documentation it says alpha or maybe beta or so, it uses with caution. How is the status there? Do you already have enterprises, let's say, that you closely work with, or how is the pipeline there? Like, how is your vision in terms of enterprise features and so on? What could be added, and why would it be interesting for enterprises to work with you?
You want to go for that one, Tim?
Yeah, so thank you. Because in my mind, it's definitely ready to be used in production, because it is being used in production. It's also being used by enterprises. Like there are even like some meta projects you can find in the wild, and we've had have had heard from other companies like Airbnb that have used Pixi. And more importantly, what I found out is that enterprises, like they can have like huge developer operations or like tool builder teams, right? So we have this open source library called Rattler, which underpins like Pixi and other things that we built. Like we've built like there were like buses work mostly, and I helped a bit at the beginning and when before we started Prefix, just for fun. And then we kind of ramped it up when we started Prefix more, and Wolf did a lot of that stuff there too, and is still doing a lot of stuff. So and enterprise actually using that to build their own tools again. So because they have maybe 10 times the development capacity that we have. So that's an interesting thing. So that library is very becoming very battle hardened, I have to say. But also Pixi, there are companies that have switched to it. Like most of their projects have switched to Pixi. We've active that alpha war implementation very actually, so timely for you to say so. Yeah, for sure. And there are some things that would be interesting, might not be interesting for the open, like people working just on small projects or open source, and they're also not something we would like we just want the package manager to be open source. So it would also always be like kind of related to it more or less. But you hear things like like scanning for vulnerabilities, for automatic updating based abilities for large package repositories, conda repositories, or you have very specific builds for architectures, for speed. There are also things like package signing, SIG store, and that's also a difficult one because you want the part of it just to be open source and available, and there might be a part that is like creating an SBOM or something like that. That would be like something that you could potentially market. So these are things that are we're looking into, but we still have to look into it. But those are features that could be interesting for enterprises that might not be interesting for just regular users.
Nice. And maybe that's a good point of time to just showcase a little bit how Pixi would look like on a package that you already have, right? Let's say you're an enterprise or just a developer doing.
In just 12 weeks, Pybites elevates you from Python coder to confident developer. Build real-world applications, enhance your portfolio, earn a professional certification showcasing tangible skills, and unlock career opportunities you might not even imagine right now. Apply now at pybit.ds/PDM.
Programming, and you already have a requirements file or maybe conda file or so. And how could it look like that you switch to the new Pixi package management? How much effort would it be? And I think you guys have prepared something for that, right?
Yeah, so I didn't prepare anything to show directly, but I can take you through creating a Pixi project from one of your actual projects from Pybites. So Pybites has this repository that's called search. And I can show you how I would go about making this a Pixi project. If I can copy paste this. So I'm going to git clone the search repository from your GitHub repository, and I'm going to go into that repository. So cd search, typing not the best. So we're now in your project, and if I do a small ls, you can see there's also a pyproject.toml. So if we're going into that, you will see that it has just the basic setup of any project.toml, pyproject.toml, including hatchling as a build system, some dependencies like requests and typer, and I think I can go a little lower. You have some optional dependencies for the testing and some optional dependencies for the tools you use to lint and format, and the rest is just a general normal project. What I can do is I can call Pixi init without any specification. This will generate me the question like, hey, I found you have already applied project.toml. Do you want me to extend this with the Pixi configuration? If I just say yes, it adds some tables to your by project.toml. So we can look at it again. And if I go down, you will see Pixi has added the tool.pixi tables. We have a project where we define where Pixi can find the packages it needs. I'm currently on Linux, so it also specifies that this project will work on Linux, which results in also creating a log file for the Linux platform. And then you can already see the environments that it added. And in those environments, it will install the required Python that you defined in your pyproject.toml. So it will get you the Python that you need. And it will also install that project itself as an editable dependency, as an editable PyPI dependency, which is kind of the basic workflow. If you would do a pip install -e of your project, it will get the dependencies, except pip cannot install Python. Pixi will also do that for you. So if I then do Pixi install, I already start creating a log file. Pixi works by creating a log file first, then installing the information in the log file into an environment. And that's currently done. So if I now do Pixi run, and then I believe it was search, I can do the help command, then it already gives me the command from the search repository that you built. And something interesting about Pixi here is that if we go into the Pixi list, you can see, it might be a little too small. Let me grow the list, or sorry, a little too big. Let me slim the list a bit down. So you can see we have installed Pybyte Search as an editable installation. And we've installed some Python tooling from conda packages. We've also installed some stuff from PyPI, and this is all in one list that you can verify your project on. What you can see is that it only installed Python requests typer, so the main dependencies of the project. But what we can also do is Pixi list and then -- environment, and then test, which is the other environment that we also created for you, which is including the PyTest and including docs and including some other tools I presume that you need for testing. And if you run any test commands, you could run it in that environment, and then you will have those those dependencies available. One small thing I could add to this is we also define our own tasks, and we have a task system which allows you to create a Pixi task. We can add one for the search command that we just saw. So if I would do Pixi task add and then the name search, and I would or search byte, I believe that you guys have. I can do search byte as the command. And do you know any examples that I could show?
Oh no, you got me. Maybe just like a number, I think, or you could just ask. Yeah, maybe let's try fast API, because there we should have something.
Let me add that as a task, and if I then do Pixi run search, it auto-completes immediately, and it will run that search for me, which is a more complex task than the single line that you need to write with Pixi run. This can be much more complicated, so I could add more dependencies to a simple task. So if you have a stage where you need to download some data, you need to build a model, and then you need to run that model. All these tasks could depend on each other and could actually have caching behind it to make this super powerful. This is a simple example where you can just run a single command in your environment. And as this is now a Pixi project, I can check my Git diff, the status of the project, and you see it will have modified my pyproject.toml and will have created Pixi.lock. If you commit these two files to your GitHub repository, everyone can recreate it on their own machine with a very locked-in log file, including the Python version, which is very powerful if you want to reproduce it on any system. There's no extra necessities that you need to install yourself.
And that's actually like there were so many things in this short introduction. So thanks already on that point, and quite some questions now probably. But something I would also like to highlight is once you have installed Pixi, you don't need to install Python anymore, because Pixi will always take care of that, right? That's something I have been asked quite a bit before by different clients, or also in the companies by more junior developers. Let's say, how should I install Python this way, that way, or the other way? Or the confusion between, do I use the right Python when you're on Mac, because Mac already installs Python by itself. So all these kind of things, they are all can be avoided, let's say, and make it even easier to start with Python. And also, just to add a couple of sentences, so search basically allows you to search any Pybites content for specific keywords, like in this case, fast API. And I think it's a nice example that if we just add the search byte to it, or search maybe fast API, maybe the better explanation than for that search, you can easily make it runnable, because you just need to run Pixi run search byte, and you don't need to look into it how the command is written out exactly. We also like it for fast API, right? If you want to start a server for the backend and you don't remember, how was it called again? Something with UV current, something with colons and dots or so. You can just write that once and it just works. So I really like that. And
there's even one extra thing that's so special about this, which I sometimes forget, but I am testing on multiple machines. I also have a Windows machine at my house that I test on, and these commands are cross-platform. So we embed our own shell into Pixi, which the commands that you write in the shell will run on their own interpreter. So you don't need to make sure that the variables are different on Windows than they're on Mac or whatever. The task will just work on any machine. If you have tasks that work only on one machine, so for instance, sometimes on Windows you have some paths that you need to manipulate, then you can actually still make them platform specific, but in general you wouldn't need to do that.
Nice, nice. And I think in general, maybe sometimes I wonder these days if I should show the clients first how to do things with pip, then with Condor, so that they run into some problems, so that they then appreciate Pixi. Because sometimes I'm asked, okay, what do you need this for? I have never needed Condor, let's say. But I, like last year, for example, I installed like this transcription pipeline where you have to install something like ffmpeg and so on. And if you don't use conda, then you need to do that somehow manually, install it in the Docker or so. But if you just use conda in that case, and you can do that via conda or via Pixi, then it's just installing it for you already completely, and then you can avoid some of the pain, let's say. Yeah, so I think that's really nice. Maybe like a follow-up question. So now let's say we are an enterprise and we have seen the value for using it for single packages. How is your vision, or how does it look like if you have now a microservice architecture or so? How would you set that up? Can we do already Pixi install, let's say, one package and it has a dependency from another package? That's something we have noticed in projects. Yeah.
I think you have asked the exact question that we also wanted to talk about with you. And I think Tim can explain it very well. I would like to, for the audience, to explain it a little more what it means up front. So this was a project. And with PyPI and Poetry, you can also have projects. This is also in every language specific package manager. The notion of a project is very hard because you can have it as dependencies, you can install it locally. And then the deployment is something the package manager can also do, meaning you can build a package from your project. And this is something we're working on currently, and I would like Tim to explain more on our ideas there.
Yeah, so the fun thing is you can kind of do this now with current Pixi in that you have to use PyPI and you can use like dependencies to other pyproject.tomls, but that is only because we use that's part of our UV integration to like kind of like expose those features. But the moment we saw that coming in, like we already knew it, but we get this question like more and more, like how can we depend on our own source dependencies? So that for conda is actually a bit more difficult than PyPI because normally there's a split between the build, like for example, conda-forge has a recipe that pulls in the source and then builds it and pushes it somewhere instead of like the build being coupled with the source. This is because conda had to recreate a lot of libraries, even lower level libraries like GCC or OpenSSL even. To rebuild this, so you could essentially rebuild the world, because as you were saying, you might need some system level dependencies like ffmpeg or something like that. So that made it a bit more difficult. But what we're working on now, we call it Pixi build first, which allows you to build a conda package from a Pixi TOML and its associated source files, and that would create a conda package or locally, and you should be able to include that. So our first version will probably only use to try it out. We're going to use like Python packages that you can build a Python package into a wheel from a Pixi TOML file and then include it somewhere else. And then Cargo and Yarn and all these other package managers. I don't know about Poetry, this part of Poetry too much, but for example, we use Rust a lot, and if you have something A that depends on B, you can specify like, hey, use the same serialization library for both these things. So specify them once, use them in both places. So that's something you would want. That would be something we would need to build after. And the cool thing actually, and this is going to get really cool, so listen closely, we can interpret the PyPI dependencies, we can interpret conda dependencies. So we could, for example, create a feature which is already like being kind of like set up, like someone is going to work on it to interpret the project dependencies array as conda dependencies, and they're normally interpreted as PyPI dependencies. So at that point, you could build both a wheel and a conda package from your Pixi TOML, which is I think pretty cool, because then you could push to both sources. That would make it a lot easier, because a lot of people know how to build, Python people know how to build a wheel, but don't know how to build a conda package per se. They might want to, but it's like now it's a bit of a hassle, and you have to learn a lot of specific terminology, and it's like it's very different from normal packaging ecosystem, so they get confused really quickly. And then, so I think this can be like a really cool feature at some point. So then you would have workspaces, and that could include features. And because Conda is so generic, we could also create a C++ builder, for example, that interprets like uses CMake directly. At that point, you could create a project with a Python source dependency and a C source dependency. And I think that's kind of like unique in the sense that the only system that I think can do this really is either the robotics operating system, ROS, that we used to work with before, or Nix. So I think that will be an exciting feature, even for Python developers, because you could maybe make a native extension somewhere, build it directly, and install it into your workspace next to your editable source dependency. So it's going to be exciting times indeed.
Awesome. And I understood, I think, 60% of what you said. Not because I think it was well explained, but just because I have already used Conda and Pixi and Pip and Poetry and so on. And so I could follow quite a bit. The other part of C and so on is maybe a little bit further away, and I guess for many listeners too. But I think the TLDR or TLDA, however you would call it when listening here, is that if you choose Pixi, you can install it both. You can make packages both for Conda and for Pip. Whereas if you would now use Pip dependencies, then it would be hard to transform it in Conda, or if you use Conda, then the other way around. So it's just additional level of freedom, let's say, degree of freedom. And on the other side, there is something growing up, let's say, that makes it much easier to manage all the package requirements with Pixi, also for microservice setup, right? Or for other kinds of setup where you have different packages and you want to import dependencies from each other.
Yeah, so in the near future, you would hopefully have one Pixi TOML file that can reference others, and it would all build and solve them together. That's the idea.
And this would be kind of like nested Pixi TOMLs, right? Or PyProject TOMLs, because you have one PyProject TOML that references another one, and in both of them there would need to be a Pixi config, or would it be sufficient if there's just a pip one, like or the usual ones?
So it's sufficient. It's sufficient to have a PyProject. I mean that as I said, that already works because we use UV to do the heavy lifting there. But if you that doesn't know about any Conda dependencies. So if you would really like to use Conda dependencies, then yeah, so there would need to be some Pixi config somewhere, like at the top level or something. So but it would be easy to pull in, like just git clone something, and ideally we would make the friction as low as possible, and that you can just include a pyproject.toml and then use that in your workspace.
Nice. So for now, that means basically you can already add the Pixi configuration on the different PyProject TOMLs. Currently, you would install these packages maybe if you have nested dependencies with a Pixi like normal command that uses the pip dependencies, and then in the near future it would also be able to use the Pixi configuration, meaning the conda dependencies as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah,
that's super cool. Yeah. So just a quick one. If you have used pip before, then it would be the equivalent of pip freeze, right? Where you get all the requirements, let's say, like the exact requirements. And if you have used conda before, then there is this conda-lock package or addition, let's say, which you need to install additionally and run additionally, so that you would have the exact conda dependencies locked out, basically. And Pixi does this on the fly whenever you run commands, right? Is there something else to know about the log file, let's say? And what are some best practices? Like, should it be in the Git directory, or should it be rather managed by Git LFS or so? Or are there some general recommendations that you have how to manage that?
Yeah, I think I can give you some tips on how to use it. So the log file is a file that we always generate. There's no way yet to turn it off. It's up to you if you want to include it into Git or not. But I would always recommend it to do so, because it's always easier to just remove it if you really don't like it on your own system than it is to make sure that it reproduces in CI on your colleague's system. And a lot of things we hear is that people want to be cutting edge and they want to use the latest, greatest always, and a log file would limit them to use the latest, greatest because they don't put it in automatically all the time they install. But you could easily run an update command. We also have dependabot or renovate equivalent kind of tool that is built by Pavel, one of our contributors, that can update your log file in CI. So you could do it like weekly or monthly or however you like it. And that would make sure that your log file is up to date with the latest and greatest that's available. And you can also specify to update only certain packages. So you could say, I don't need Python to be the latest greatest. I'm fine with the version I'm on, but Fast API needs to be updated every month or every week. And commands like that you could add to your CI to make it automatic. And this will create a situation where you can decide when things start to break. So some of these updates of packages might break your own code. And we would, in previous work, have situations where our nightly CI would suddenly fail and the whole sprint would be turned over because the issue that it created was so big that we couldn't just simply solve it in a few hours. And with this log file, there's no way that we pull in any packages that are suddenly updated by someone. You will just be safe. You can just continue your work, and then your update PR or your update situation will let you know when there is a problem and when you need to fix or make sure that you solve for the right versions. Change your code, however.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that's something that, again, when you haven't experienced that problem yet, it's maybe not so clear what is the benefit, but it's hard, right? It's hard to sell something where it's important to experience first the pain to then appreciate it. But I think it's also good to just maybe at that point trust that, hey, they say that there may be a huge problem, maybe have a minimal example of how that can go terribly wrong so that you can directly see it. But basically having that log file and knowing that the dependencies will be installed exactly like this on different platforms, or as exactly as possible on different platforms, is quite a big win, I would say. And in other tools, it's really often like you need to set up something manually yourself, like the conda-forge flow. You need to think about it, and that's something that is really nice that in Pixi it comes right away. I must say we also had like one current, or it's maybe a couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure if that's fixed yet, but one situation where when you have editable dependency and different platforms, then it would change the log file again and again, even though there weren't real changes. So is that something that is already solved and I just have to upgrade, or are you aware of that? Or could you explain like what is behind that and maybe how possible fixes could be added soon to the Pixi environment?
So with an editable install, the way it works is it builds a wheel behind the scenes and installs it into your environment. And the moment the metadata changes, like you touch the PyProject file, we need to rebuild because you might have changed something to the metadata. We've learned this like kind of from UV, how they did this. So we kind of looked at that, and they were using a hash of that TOML file. And the problem with this is that sometimes, it just changed or something and it rebuilds for nothing. So we're thinking of taking maybe a subset of these fields to actually like to see if to see if that changed, then we don't rebuild, for example, or because it's hard to know what build backend is doing what, so we have to be very specific there. But given that, so that's how it works. We've also had just a lot of problems where we didn't take something into account, and there's this check that's called satisfiability. So it checks if the log file is still valid to the to like what the specification is, and then it says no, it isn't. So I'm going to resolve and reinstall. So there could also just as well be a bug there. So definitely there's this flag that you can use -v, and you can do double V to get extra verbose mode. And if anyone is experiencing this and you think it's rebuilding too often, make an issue with that verbose log, paste it in, and then we can definitely have a look, because this is something we already fixed a couple of bugs on. So it will be that there's something else there.
Yeah. And I think that's also a great example that I can just say, like, adding an issue, then the conversation about it, and actually having a new feature added to Pixi is really something like a matter of sometimes just weeks or so. Because like we said, we in the beginning, we had the last podcast in November 23. Now it's August 24, and there have been so many things added, and sometimes you can really be directly integrated into the open source discussion. So yeah, whenever you experience something like this, I can also just encourage to reach out to Pixi and just mention it. Yeah.
I would also recommend users to join our Discord if they feel comfortable with that, because we are very active there, and we also always like to get some feedback on what the tool is doing, and really care a lot about not breaking things. So fixing the real bugs as quick as possible is very important to us.
Yeah, and we're also a small team, so we can't tackle everything. So there could be sometimes, but we do try to keep track of what is important. But if you, as a listener, want to contribute to Pixi, and I know it can be very daunting, especially when it's a large code base, but we're also very willing, if you want to do a contribution, to add either like a small call or like an explanation somehow. That will be easier for you to get into the code. So I think not a lot of people are aware that people do this, but yeah, I've generally found that more open source projects do this, and I mean, we could still use a lot of help. So if we can get you up to speed a bit more quickly, we're happy to give some of our time for that.
Awesome. So we already touched a little bit about the last questions I have thought of regarding the vision, and also so what's next, something that you are really excited about. Tim, you just mentioned like the nested or let's say in general package management with conda and pip. How do you imagine Python packaging, and maybe general packaging, but for our audience more Python packaging, to look like in 1 and in 5 years? And what are some things that you're excited about in the more near term future, let's say?
I know
You want to go first?
Yeah, so
whoever wants to go first, yeah.
So I'm really excited about Pixi build. Like I'm really excited about it because it just gives me like something I couldn't have thought about. And like you were saying, the ability, I think a lot of people don't realize, especially coming from Python, that you need a lot of system level packages. Like you had a case with FFmpeg is a perfect case, or STL, or any graphics library or something like that. Being able to get like an isolated environment for that means that you are able to run it on any machine. You're right that there are some of these manual steps, right? That you always have to install OpenSSL and this way and this way and that. And with Pixi, we try to alleviate this. And I even had to get used to it, that I would see an issue and I'm like, I probably can't reproduce it, because I'm like used to not being able to reproduce these things. But then there was a Pixi file and I thought, no, I can just run it and start, which is like kind of like great. And once you get used to it, you don't want to go back. And I think that is something we would like to change, like that it's just, I mean, there are so many computer science programs where people have like one whole day of setting up their PCs, and someone is using a Mac while the other ones are using Windows, and we just want to get rid of that friction. And I think, build is one thing to do that, and workspaces, because you can do your own source things. But I think the bigger picture is just ideally not having to worry about these things as much as you're probably not aware that you're doing. But then if you think about it, there's always a lot of this custom setup per project. So that's the big idea, I think, that we want to change.
Ruben, anything to add to that? Because I think that was already pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Tim. I personally really care about the robotics community, because that was like my whole study and my whole first few years of working. And I know the pain that these people are in. They might not always know that they're in a lot of pain, but it's so much easier if you're just developing with a tool where there's one solution for package management, workflow management, deployment, and all those problems in one tool. They don't have it yet, and that's what I want Pixi to become for that industry. And yeah, that's just something I'm working towards together
Yes.
with the whole team, of course. But that's my way of staying focused.
Yeah. And I can say like in November last year, I was already definitely inspired. Now I have used it for a couple of months, and now I say always that's the go-to, let's say, recommending it to the clients and so on. And I also really think that vision is great, right? Having really Pixi run and then it works, and you can easily distribute it or share it with colleagues or whomever. And something that I was thinking could be a nice addition, not sure how hard that would be, but I saw Pulumi, for example, so infrastructure as code tool. They added their own Pulumi AI, and they basically now have added some steps that if you get an error in the terminal, it will automatically try to fix that. So that I'm not sure how far that would be away, but for Pixi to automatically add that dependency that is currently missing or something like that. Not sure how dangerous that is in a dependency world. Could also create some open doors for viruses or whatever if it just installs anything. But yeah, maybe that would be also amazing that you at some point in 2030 or so you wouldn't have these pains anymore that I have certainly also gone through with Conda and all the different Python package managers.
Yeah,
So one of the
it's a great idea. As you said, we're open to content. No, I think it's a great idea to have these and see how we can use that this coming world, so to speak, more.
Nice.
The nice thing about package management is that it's a perfect math problem. So the solve of the packages is like a complete solve. So there are some routes we can still take to improve it without having to call some kind of server that's running a LLM or whatever to figure it out for ourselves. But yeah, it would be cool to get help. Like, you have these packages. Are you sure you don't also would like this one as well? There's steps in between we can do.
Nice. Yeah, thanks so much for explaining a little bit more of the world of Pixi and also introducing yourselves as part of the team. So I can only say I appreciate a lot that you solve all these pains that hopefully future developers don't even know anymore, because it's just all solved by Pixi. But the developers that have seen the world before will probably also appreciate it quite a lot. And I think you deserve a huge thank you for that.
Thank you for saying so.
Thank you.
Means a lot.
Yes, means a lot to us. I feel like we're coming to an end on the podcast, so I'd also like to do a thank you to the rest of our community. We have some big players in it who are mainly working at companies like Quantco, who does a lot of the testing and has completely moved over to a lot of Pixi projects already. We also have a good contact with Rerun, who's also working in robotics, but also completely changed over to Pixi, and we learn a lot about their use cases. We definitely want to thank Astral for making UV and for sharing their great work in such a way that we can also help our community with the same benefits. And of course, Conda for the initial creation of Conda and open sourcing the whole Conda ecosystem for other developers to benefit from it. And without all these companies, we wouldn't be able to create such a cool product in such a fast time. Together with just a small group of people.
Yeah, and let's not forget all the contributors to conda-forge, which is the packaging ecosystem we rely on, and it's just like tireless work maintaining, updating these packages, making sure companies, people can depend on it, and things can get, as you said, packaging can be hard, so things can get really hairy there as well. So and most of them are doing that in their free time. So thank you for all your effort.
Amazing. I think those are perfect words for the end of the podcast. So looking forward to have you guys back on the podcast. Let's see when there are, again, like some great additions to the tool, so we can share some good news again. And
Thank you.
Yeah, so see you guys.
See ya.
See you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. To hear more from us, go to Pybites/friends, that is pybit.es/friends, and receive a free gift just for being a friend of the show.
And to join our thriving community of Python programmers, go to pybites/community. That's pybit.es/community. We hope to see you there and catch you in the next episode.